Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose.
Cutting down to the truth through history and experience. Subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com.
The next episode of The Scalpel starts now.
Welcome to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose. I recently got an ad on Twitter from the Department of Homeland Security. It said, if you see something, say something. Report terrorism. I thought that was pretty interesting. I also saw another thing on Twitter from the Department of Justice. It says, if you see something, say something. You should report terrorism. So I'd like to make a report today. I would like to let them know that I know where Siraj Haqqani is. Because on the FBI website, it's reported that there is a $10 million reward for Siraj Haqqani because he was involved in a suicide bombing at the Serena Hotel, I believe, in Afghanistan. And I have it on good authority that Siraj Haqqani is in Kabul, Afghanistan right now, serving as the Interior Minister of Afghanistan. You think I'll get the reward? Probably not. You know, it would be funny if it wasn't true. True that Siraj Haqqani is now the Minister of Interior of Afghanistan. This bipolar, and that's not a slam on any people that have bipolar disorder, but Siraj, from my understanding of people that know him, say that he's bipolar, and I don't think Siraj takes his meds. This chucklehead who is responsible for kidnapping Americans, hat tip David Rhodes, who's responsible for killing Americans through an elaborate group of suicide bombers that have killed American servicemen in Kabul and around Afghanistan, is now the Ministry of Interior. And that should give everybody pause. It should give everybody pause because I think people are kind of scratching their heads because it's been a long weekend, a long 4-day Labor Day weekend. And they probably don't know what to make of the current situation in Afghanistan, so I want to bring it back to the forefront. I believe it is my moral obligation to bring it back to the forefront. Because over this long 4-day weekend, I believe the Department of State and whatever neurons are still working in Joe Biden's head were hoping that Americans would just, get on with their lives, that the resistance, which is actually the legitimate government in Afghanistan up in the Panjshir Valley, would just be wiped out and then we would move on with the news cycle, because that's all I think this administration, this Department of State, this massive bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. lives for, is the narrative and the news cycle. Because back on August 14th, as Daniel Greenfield wrote in Front Page Magazine, he writes, on August 14th, Secretary of State Blinken spoke with Afghanistan's former president and promised the Biden administration would provide a bulk shipment of dollars. The next day, Kabul fell. And on that same call, Afghan's former leader had agreed to surrender power to the Taliban. Now, President Trump was impeached over a phone call that wasn't even wrong. Here we have the transcript of a phone call that the Biden administration made to President Ghani, the former president of Afghanistan, that they was going to get a bulk shipment of dollars, and, the next day Kabul fell. The Biden administration had effectively agreed to provide a massive infusion of cash to the Taliban. But the final deal fell through, and the Afghan government hightailed it out of town, and the Taliban just walked in to fill the vacuum in Kabul. And the bulk shipment of dollars never arrived. Now, why am I telling you about this? Why is it important? It's important because Biden's diplomats scrambled to evacuate Kabul. And the governor of Afghanistan's central bank already had a ticket and was headed to the airport because he got out. The guy that headed up Afghanistan's central bank, which is DAB, I'll just keep it short. He already had a ticket. He was on a plane, and he caught a military plane because he had to get out of Dodge. Because since then, he has tweeted that the Taliban had actually come looking for him because the Taliban were hoping to get their hands on the money. And as Andrew Greenfield writes, but much of that money was in the United States. And the most tangible part of that was $1.3 billion in gold, which is sitting in downtown Manhattan, just a little bit south of Ground Zero, ironically enough, in the vaults of the Federal Reserve. And if there were any justice, that money right now would be used to compensate police officers, firefighters, and workers who died on that day or later from ailments related to 9/11. But Greenfield goes on to write, meanwhile, all the Taliban have to do is fly into JFK, take an Uber to 33rd Liberty Street, and ask to be taken down to the basement to see all the gold bars. And even in Biden's America and de Blasio's New York City, they might have trouble walking away with over $1 billion in gold bars. But not unless they trade their camos in Kamezis for Black Lives Matters t-shirts. The United States did plenty of dumb things in Afghanistan, but at least it kept the gold locked up in the vault in New York City. And Ahmadi, the former head of the DAB, the central bank in Afghanistan, estimates that $7 billion of DAB assets are being held by the Federal Reserve, which includes gold, the bills and bonds, $300 million in cash, and another $24 billion in World Bank funds for aiding developing countries. There's also $700 million at the bank for international settlements and another $1.3 billion in international accounts. He states that the accounts in Turkey, which is basically an Islamic dictatorship that's friendly to Taliban, they may get that. But the Taliban need more than that. Because he goes on to talk about the fact that the Taliban make money from extortion. They make money from the drug trade. They make millions of dollars, but they don't make enough money to run a country. Even though the Taliban are still in control of the border crossings and they can take advantage of the Chinese money, that'll help them, but it's a long way from the cash they need to run a functional country. I'm going to post this article in our show notes. I think it's important to take a look at. But the bottom line is the Taliban need money. And that leads me to what's going on right now. Because just a few days ago, the State Department put out a cable saying that American citizens and SIV holders and green card holders in Afghanistan should go to the airports, and they will be allowed through by the Taliban. Just get them the lists or the manifests of folks back here, get them our manifests of the people trying to get out of the country, and they'll give it to the Taliban. They'll clear them through the airport, and they'll be allowed to leave. And a lot of people did that. I'll just add, I didn't. And when those folks got to the airport, especially in Mazar Sharif, they were not allowed to leave. And as we understand right now, the Taliban are holding them. They're detaining them. They're not keeping them from leaving. They're just not allowing them to leave right now, according to the Taliban spokesman. Why do you think that is? Well, I think that is because the Taliban only have really two key assets that they can use. Number one is their ability to cause massive amounts of chaos, and their other asset is people. And they're the same assets that are held by jihadists around the world, from Hamas in Gaza to the Houthis in Yemen. And the Taliban don't care if portions of the population, especially non-Pashtuns, non-Sunni Muslims, suffer. But they know we do care. They know that we are concerned, so they can use those human assets and their ability to cause chaos to get America to provide continuing humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. Even though the flow of this humanitarian aid is to a population that are completely controlled by terrorists. So the aid will be funding terrorists. They also know that the people they're holding at the airports, these, quote, American citizens, which are there, they can use that money to get those pallets of cash that the Biden administration had initially planned to send to Afghanistan. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I believe, Ghani got out of town too quick, and the winds of the Taliban sweeping into Afghanistan blew that fig leaf right off those pallets of cash, and they were unable to be delivered. So now, while people are the Taliban's biggest asset, their biggest short-term asset are the Afghans and Americans that are trapped in Afghanistan. And so whatever agreements the Biden administration reached with the Taliban to allow them to operate and coordinate on security arrangements were almost certainly financial. And once the United States left, the Taliban is able to extract money from every single Afghan who desires to leave the country. That's what the Taliban want. That's what the Taliban need. That's why they want billions. That billions will be a down payment in the funding of Islamic terrorism. And the day before Kabul fell, Biden nearly allowed a massive bundle of pallets of dollars to be shipped to Afghanistan. And he did so knowingly, or at least a couple of his neurons knew, and the rest of the Unmagnificent Seven knew. That would be Susan Rice knew, Blinken knew, Generals Milley and Austin knew. The Unmagnificent Seven knew that that money was destined for a Taliban regime. It just fell apart too fast. So now we have to see, and when I say fell apart, I mean the city. So now we're going to see how long it takes the Biden administration to ship the money to the Taliban. Hey, he may already be doing it now. You know, Biden had learned a lot from his predecessor that he worked with. That would be President Obama, because remember, he sent pallets of cash to Iran and used a fig leaf of a few American hostages. And now Biden has hundreds of Americans that could be held hostage in Afghanistan. So what better way to prop up an illegitimate government, an Islamic terrorist state, and just give them some cash than to create a massive hostage situation. And that's what, President Obama had already discovered. It was a great pretext for funding Islamic terrorism. So now Biden has created a massive hostage crisis in Afghanistan. And what better way is there for him to do that and to then force the United States to fund our worst enemies once again, because they are our worst enemies? Because it's not only the Taliban. You have the Pakistani ISI that has been reported open source to be in Afghanistan, and the ISI has gone global in funding terrorist networks. You also have the Chinese that are in Afghanistan. You also have the Russians who are in Afghanistan. We have reports now that Russian military intelligence, the GRU, are up in the north part of the Panjshir Valley doing direct fire reporting so that the Taliban can find those legitimate figures in the Afghan government and the Afghan military that are just trying to do nothing but keep that country free from a tyrannical regime of a death cult known as the Taliban, known as Al-Qaeda that's working with the Taliban, and known as ISIS-K that's also there. And I would just add, we understand the Taliban's going to fight against ISIS-K, but you haven't heard about any of that. The only kinetic events we've seen from ISIS-K that are reported was that, major bomb that killed 13 Americans. That major bomb that wasn't a suicide bomb because it was much too larger. My guess, it was an IED planted near that gate because I have a picture of that gate before the bomb went off. And the people were so packed in there, you couldn't get a car even near that to carry that enough massive explosive to blow a hole in the ground and what you saw and cause the overpressure that could be felt, the force of the bomb that could be felt 300 meters from the explosion. No, that had to be a buried IED or maybe a car that was left there. I don't know, but it was pre-planned. And I'm not really sure that ISIS did it. We don't really know. We don't know because we don't have, quote unquote, any intelligence assets in Afghanistan anymore. We don't have any military in Afghanistan anymore. We only have the facts on the ground as they present today, September 7th, 2021. And the facts on the ground are that the actual legitimate military and government of Afghanistan in the Panjshir Valley with the de facto president, Amarullah Saleh, are in extremis. They're in extremis because Russia, China, by report, are helping the Taliban direct target these guys. And we don't have our State Department or our military putting any type of diplomatic pressure on these guys to stop attacking this group. In fact, the last 4 days, they've been doing nothing but sticking their heads in the sand. And what's more important is the media has been doing nothing but covering for them. This is a mainstream media that has lied to us since day one. This is a mainstream media that's told us about Russian collusion. This is a mainstream media that told us about how we had to impeach President Trump over a phone call. This is a mainstream media that has been caught in more lies that it would be an entire show for a week just to explain them to you. And now they're telling us there's nothing to see in Afghanistan. This is a mainstream media that refuses to hold President Biden to account when he said that we had the ability to support terrorism operations in Afghanistan, and that is counter them with over-the-horizon capabilities. Even NPR wrote about this in May of 2021. But right now, we understand that there are no over-the-horizon capabilities. We do understand that the actual capabilities of the Afghan Air Force, that Joe Biden talked about how they were so good and we had given them so much money and equipment right before Kabul fell. He spoke about that. But we now know the Afghan Air Force uses U.S. aircraft that are maintained by a large contingent of U.S. civilian contractors who were not allowed to go back and maintain this equipment prior to Kabul falling. So all those contractors were gone, or they had to pull out when our military pulled out. And then Biden talked about our over-the-horizon capabilities again. The only problem is our drones can't do that when the closest existing U.S. bases are in the Gulf region, including an air base in Qatar. And that's a long way from Afghanistan. So time and distance challenges prevent us from having over-the-horizon capabilities. But Joe Biden even tried to get Putin to allow U.S. air bases in central Russia, as the Wall Street Journal reported. But Putin rejected that request at a summit with Biden because Putin doesn't respect Joe Biden either. So we don't possess counter-terrorist drones that can fly over countries around Afghanistan undetected, nor even assuredly survive against the new American-equipped Taliban Air Force. The Marine Corps General Kenneth McKenzie, who oversaw the U.S. operations in the Middle East as head of the U.S. Central Command, told lawmakers in April that the MQ-9, the Reaper drone, is not viable in a high-end fight, including against some of the threats that could be posed by adversaries operating in CENTCOM's area of responsibility in the near future. So now our services are trying to replace our current drone fleet, while the current crop of flag rank drones led by Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who told in March 2020 at a congressional hearing the U.S. might have a platform that can strike targets and landlock Afghanistan from over the horizon in the long run, but in the near future it would be challenged. So Captain Obvious, even though he is a general, General Milley knew that there were no over-the-horizon capabilities. And it's not challenged, General Milley. It's just not there. And men, women, and children are dying for it because you didn't pay attention in the Panjshir Valley. And by contrast, we already know the Iranian proxies have already developed their own cheap, penetrating over-the-horizon attack systems, and I could talk about that, but I won't right now. So where are we? We are sitting back in the United States of America. We've lost 13 brave servicemen in Afghanistan recently, and we've done nothing about that. We've done nothing about the slaughter of women and children up in the Panjshir. We've done nothing about the fact that a terrorist on our Department of Justice most wanted list with a $10 million bounty on him has just been made the Ministry of Interior in Afghanistan, and we are going to send them money to support their fledgling government. In a nutshell, we're in a bad situation. We're in a situation that is immoral, improper, and wrong. And the mainstream media is telling us nothing to see here, move on. And meanwhile, back on our shores, we're told that let's get vaccine passports, let's lock down again, let's mask. And I say it's time to take the mask off of all these chuckleheads. I say it's time for Americans to stand up. It's time to let people know that we are still a moral country. Alexander de Tocqueville said it, and I'm paraphrasing back when he wrote Democracy in America. America will only remain great as it remains moral. And again, I'm paraphrasing. And leaving our Afghan allies, those that supported us, and those that are citizens in our country, leaving those folks to the Taliban is not moral. It is not right. And it doesn't represent, as Barack Obama would say, who we are as Americans. So American citizens are united in this. And this is not the first time we've had to unite around a tragedy. And as September 11th rolls around again on the 20th anniversary, I would remind folks that remember that event why we have the ability to unite. Because back at 9/11, I remember vividly, Americans that didn't even look like one another came together and painted in one color. We had Americans that spoke all different languages, all forms of mixtures of civilizations and religious beliefs. But after 9/11, the American tragedy caused 300 million people to put their right hand over their heart. Not one person rushed to accuse the White House, the Army, or any of the intelligence services that they were a bunch of losers. No one said that. No one rushed to empty their bank accounts. No one rushed out on the streets just to gape and look and wonder, what do we do next? No, instead, Americans volunteered to donate blood and give a helping hand. Americans en masse enlisted in our military. And after the first moments of panic in New York City, they then raised their flag over the smoking ruins, put on T-shirts, caps, ties, and the colors of our national flag. They placed flags on buildings and in cars, as if every place on every car recognized that we are one nation under God. And on every occasion, Americans started singing God Bless America. And I remember on the steps of the Capitol, both houses united, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, on the steps of the Capitol and saying, God bless America. And I watched that broadcast live. So how on earth were we able to respond united as one basic being in the United States of America? So many different cultures, so many different people, but we responded as Americans. Right now, I probably find that difficult to answer. But I can only reach one conclusion. Only freedom can work such miracles. Only freedom could work the miracle that we saw at the Revolutionary War that brought our nation into existence. Only freedom worked the miracle that united our nation back together after a brutal, bloody civil war to end the tyranny of slavery. Only freedom could get young men, barely 18 years old, to move in droves across the Atlantic and the Pacific to fight for their nation and to end a massive tyranny in Japan and in Germany and Europe. And only freedom will bring about a resurgence, an awakening in the United States of America in 2021 to reveal the deception behind the deception, to reveal a government that has become unmoored from morality, history, and experience, and a military that only cares about wokeness and not completing the mission and bringing every man home. I pray you have a good week. I pray that you recognize that there are people suffering in Afghanistan. There are American citizens hiding, fearing for their life. And I pray that you will have your congressman, your senator, and that you will blow up, metaphorically, their phone lines, their emails, their fax machines. Let them know, melt them down and let them know we don't leave anyone behind, and we need to make sure a terrorist superstate is not accepted on the world stage. I disagree with President Biden and his administration. We are not a global nation. We are one nation under God. We are Americans. And the United States of America will only remain free by protecting our borders and all Americans, whether they're here or around the world. We have to turn back to God. We have to realize that it's a miracle that we have our nation and that freedom comes from God. And that's how we got here in the first place. Galatians 5:1 says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage." Or I would say with the woke of bondage. You see, what we're seeing right now, the dereliction of duty in Afghanistan, I agree we had to leave, but not this way, is a stain on our nation and is empowering our enemies and causing our allies to have great trepidation in trusting us, and we can't have that. We can't have the woke of bondage and allow our military to fall, our intelligence services to rot, and our nation to be absorbed into a globalist stream that would usher us down the road to socialism and tyranny. Pay attention. Talk to your senators, talk to your congressmen, talk to your fellow Americans. We can remain united. The media doesn't represent us, and unfortunately, those that we elected aren't representing us right now. But that should never stop us from recognizing that we will remain the greatest, freest nation in the world. Enjoy the rest of your week. I pray that you have the conversation, that you recognize inaction is the same thing as doing the wrong thing. You have to move, and this is not a time to do nothing. Do it peacefully. Do it with great determination, because it is the only way that we will keep freedom rolling.
Head high, protest line. Freedom scribbled on your sign. Headline, New York Times. Standing on the edge of a revolution. Hey, hey, just obey. Your secret's safe with the NSA. In God we trust, or the CIA. Standing on the edge of a revolution.
The Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose.
Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com.